It is the 4th of July, better known as Independence Day, but America has never really been America to me. So I thought it would be interesting to have this conversation with somebody who has gone into deep thought and study. And his documentary is, I think, the blueprint for all documentaries to come. It is part TED Talk, definitely whole history lesson baked into inspiration. Let me welcome the creator of the film, Who We Are, A Chronicle of Racism in America. Jeffery Robinson is here. Hi, welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you from sunny Seattle. Good to see you. As I was rewatching this in preparation for this day, which for my whole life, it was cookouts and American flags, hot dogs, and apple pie. Growing up in my school, never really contemplated any other kind of celebration but America's independence. Inherently, I knew that my forefathers were enslaved, but I never contemplated that until my adulthood. And your documentary puts it right there. Let me ask you, first question, the Constitution, you say, wrought with enslavement. Should it be rewritten?
Well, rewriting the Constitution is a huge, huge endeavor that requires the states to approve the rewriting. I think you can see how complicated it is with something like the experience with the Equal Rights Amendment. What could be more simple than women have the same rights as men? Period, end of story. I mean, that's what it was about, but that turned into such a complicated thing. And so what we are left with in an imperfect system is a constitution that has provisions in it which are more than sufficient to take America down a path toward racial justice that we have never been down before. It's simply a matter of how those provisions are interpreted.
Jeffery Robinson, former executive of the ACLU, right? Executive director, senior.
I was a deputy legal director. Anthony Romero would be upset. He's the executive director, but I was a deputy legal director.
All right. Apologies to Anthony Ramirez. So should we try to repair this? I've been going down, before King left this earth, he wrote, "Where do we go from here? Community of Chaos." And then he was murdered. And that book was published posthumously. And he, pondered, is this thing fixable? If you say in Who We Are, that this country was built on this mythology, it's baked in this lie, and genocide and dehumanization is at its core founding principle. Is it fixable?
Yes, it's fixable because we've never tried to fix it with solutions that would actually change things. And the reason for that is that we have never acknowledged this history. This is why people could look at what happened to George Floyd in Minnesota and say, oh, well, the way to fix this is to have a law that says police officers can't kneel on your neck. That's an absolutely fine law, but that won't fix the problem. And we have a hundreds of year laboratory experiment of what will happen in America given those racist roots in the founding of our country. We have an experiment that's been going on since 1776. What will happen if we ignore the truth about our past and think up solutions that are doomed to fail because they ignore that truth? So we've never done what's being suggested now before. It ain't just me suggesting it. There are people that have been talking about this for a long time, but we are now at a point where we can get information in front of millions of Americans, and information that is fact-based. Information, I guess somebody could say, the Declaration of Independence never happened. It was a forged document and somebody made it up. But, when we're getting down to that level level of conspiracy theory. I think the people are not reasonable, nor anybody that should be guiding what happens in our country. So we don't know what would happen if we took the provisions of the Constitution and applied them in the way that they were meant to be applied. Because remember, the Constitution has been amended time after time after time. And the last thing I want to say is, don't put this solely on the Constitution. If there are a majority of people in this country who want our laws interpreted in a way that's consistent with racial justice, there is a very direct way to deal with that, and that's at the ballot box. And when you have less than half of the registered voters in a country voting in the most important elections in our lifetime, that says something. And I understand people are discouraged and people are have lacked confidence in the system, but the tipping point I described in this movie in 2018, it's the same tipping point we're at right now. And we have never been called upon more than right now to act as opposed to talking about it.
Okay, I'm not going to spread my pessimism that America has the temperament or the fortitude to push us over that hump that we keep going right to and then falling all the way back, getting right there and then falling all the way back. I'm not confident in this current country because 70 million people voted for lies, and then 100 million people sat home in 2016. 100 million.
Let me be clear. I share your concern. I'm not saying that I'm confident. I'm not saying that I'm optimistic. I'm saying that we are now at a point where you can't claim you didn't know anymore. You can't claim, oh, I didn't realize that the history went back that far. You can't claim this information was never given to me, because it's out there right now, not just with this film, with the 1619 Project, with all kinds of other things. This information is now out there, and we got nobody to blame but ourselves. And so, as you say, my view is we're going to figure out just who America is in the next 20 years. And I don't know which way that will go.
20, I think too.
But here's the thing. This is not, in my view, this country has been around for 400 years. You can't put a radical change into a moment or a 1 year period or a 2 year period or a slipping back that's horrific. And so that we are on the edge and we come back from that. We just don't know. And so I think it's going to be the next 10 years. The tipping point I described in 2018, it's the same one that we're at right now. And I think the next 10 years is going to have a huge telling on which way we go. So last thing I'll say about it is, if there's anybody out there that's thinking, oh, I don't need to pay attention to this, or, oh, it's all so complicated, I'm just going to turn my head away. If that's what you're choosing to do, understand what you're leaving for your children and your grandchildren, because they're the ones that are going to pay the price.
I predict Mother Nature will have the last word in the next 10 years, and none of this will even matter. But that's neither here nor there. All right. Who We Are, it's a whole project, the Who We Are project. Jeffrey Robinson is the creator of it. Amazing, brilliant mind. Of course, as we just mentioned, former, let me get this correct, deputy legal director of the ACLU, also Harvard educated. And as I was watching this, I went to Drew University, never learned any of the things that were in your documentary or anything else that I've read, from Edward Baptist, The Half Has Never Been Told, to Howard French's Born in Blackness and all the other myriad books that he has put out, to all of the history that I'm learning in class with Dr. Gray Carr for the last 2 years. Never learned this in school. I paid attention to history. Wentworth Gunther was one of my professors as well. Loved the Black history class with him. What did you, in your studies to produce this documentary, was the most shocking bit of information that was left untold to you?
I think that is an excellent question. And I just want to say that, in all the studies that you did, and you weren't taught this stuff, this stuff was hiding, but it was hiding in plain sight. And so uh, I think I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. You know, I was born in 1956, and I integrated a Catholic school in 1963. So on the one hand, I got an education about how to read and write, but what I was taught was the white version of our history. And slavery was a really bad thing, but there were a whole lot of people that didn't like it. And then there was the Civil War, and the Civil War was about slavery, but it was about states' rights, and it was about other things. And finally, the Civil War ended, and man, wasn't that great. And then we had some problems, but the Civil Rights Movement solved all of that, and now everything's fine. That is the mother's milk that I was fed from the first grade on. And in the first grade, I was in an all-Black Catholic school. So the first grade wasn't any different than what I was taught later. And so two of the things that I think slapped me in the face more than anything were reading the actual secession statements from the states that left the Union. And I was shocked at how direct, honest, and unapologetic they were. And you know, one of my favorites is, I think it's Georgia. It's either Georgia or Virginia, but they basically say, "You told us we were going to get to keep these enslaved people, and now you're taking them away from us, and that's not the deal we cut. So we're out of here." And they were right, because the deal they cut was that they were going to get to keep these enslaved people. And so when you read statement after statement that says the reason for the war is enslaving people, Mississippi said it as clearly, even if it wasn't phonetically correct. They said, we have a choice: either give up $4 billion in dollars worth of property or secede from the Union. And guess what they did? They seceded from the Union. So I was amazed at how the South lost the war but won the peace, and how this myth of how what the Civil War was about had just been spread until all of us were accepting it at some level. And I say the thing that matches that is hearing the entire, and I shouldn't say entire, hearing much of the history of the Tulsa Massacre, which I had never heard of before. And the time that I did research on it and read about it, I was floored. And then when I went to Tulsa and took the real Black Wall Street tour and was educated even further by Chief Amusan and Christy Williams and Dr. Tiffany Crutcher of the Terrence Crutcher Foundation, and all of those survivors and descendants of survivors about what actually happened there, I was crushed. And I thought, how could an event like this not have been taught to me, just like Pearl Harbor was taught to me, just like the beginning of the Revolutionary War was taught to me. And that's the point where I feel like my mind then came to, well, anything is possible. And it's all sitting there. It's just a matter of whether we want to take a look at it.
I'm going to ask you to turn your speaker down a little bit because there's some feedback. Okay. We're talking with Jeffery Robinson, former deputy. Oh, let me get this correct. We're talking with Jeffery Robinson, former ACLU deputy legal director, also creator of the documentary docufilm Who We Are, a chronicle of racism in America. So what was your road to Damascus? I asked this of everyone. What was the thing that made you come to the secession statements that blew your mind?
I think the major thing, and I talk about this a bit in the film, is that when my wife's younger sister and mother passed away, they were raising my wife's younger sister's son, our nephew, and they were doing that in New York. And so our nephew moved from New York to Seattle and became our son instead of our nephew. And my wife and I didn't have kids. And all of a sudden, this young Black man was in my home looking at me and asking questions that made me very uncomfortable. And at first I was just looking for, like, how do you raise a child? He was 13 years old. And I'm like, I am not prepared for this. So I was just terrified. And I'm looking for things written by Black authors about raising children. And I start stumbling on to little bits of this history. And I would find one thing that would lead me to 3 other things. And then those 3 things would lead me to 10 things. And the chief of staff at the Who We Are Project, Andrea Crabtree, has worked with me for over 20 years. And she was my paralegal at the time. And so I would come in after a weekend and say, I need these 15 articles and copies of these photographs. And she's like, what case are we working on? I didn't meet this client. And I'm saying, I don't know what we're working on. And so I was just collecting the information more and more and more. And my training as a criminal defense lawyer taught me that when you have an overwhelming set of facts, step back from it, put it in a timeline. Something as profound yet as simple as Descartes' Discourse on Method from 1636. I thought, somebody suggested I read it, and I thought, man, it's going to have all these thou and arts and tos and all that stuff, and it's going to be 18,000 pages long. It's like 3 paragraphs. And what it says is, when you have a really complicated subject, break it into small parts and understand each small part. And when you've understood each small part, you'll put them together and you'll understand the whole thing. And that's what I did. I used Descartes and I used a timeline. And when I lined this stuff up, the top of my head came off. And I thought, you stupid, ignorant, and then a word I won't use, you have no excuse for not knowing this stuff. How could you not have known this stuff? How could you not have seen the implications of this? And it's like, you know, for many of us, especially in our community, it's like, we've known this shit was there, pardon my expression, we've known this was there from the beginning, even though we didn't know the detail and the facts. It's like one of my favorite bands has a line in a song, if it's all right, how come you can't sleep at night? And we have known that these obstacles were more than just individual racism. And we've seen part of the picture, but not the whole picture. And I got angry at myself. And once I decided that that wasn't going to do anything except either make me an alcoholic or give me a stomach ulcer, I decided, well, I'll blame somebody else. How about my teachers? And then I thought, well, how are they going to teach me something that they were never taught? And once I got past that, it was, well, I wonder how many other people in America don't know this. And that the answer to that question has not surprised me because I didn't know it. But it is shocking when you consider that the one absolutely necessary component for a successful democracy is an educated electorate.